Before the maps were redrawn by foreign hands, the African continent was a tapestry of complex, evolving societies. For centuries, its people had cultivated a balance with the land, fostering intricate political systems and rich cultural traditions. Kingdoms rose and fell, driven by internal dynamics, not external pressures. From the savannas to the coastlines, vibrant centers of trade and craft flourished, a testament to a deep-seated spirit of innovation and self-sufficiency. This was not a static world. It was a world of constant motion, of adaptation, of life itself. But a shadow was falling from across the sea, a shadow that would not just alter this world, but systematically seek to unmake it. The first tremors of this cataclysm came with the European slave trade. And let me be clear, this was not merely commerce. This was a violent, European-driven enterprise that fundamentally crippled African societies. Estimates of the millions who survived the brutal Middle Passage, they only hint at the true demographic catastrophe. The loss was far, far greater because the trade specifically targeted the young, the healthy, the very future of the continent. Entire generations were stolen, leaving behind a demographic void that would echo for centuries. This violent extraction warped the very fabric of society. The focus of labor shifted from productive agriculture to militarized slave raiding, fostering a vicious cycle of conflict and insecurity. To acquire European guns, you had to capture people, and to capture people, you needed guns. A parasitic relationship that halted organic progress. While some states, like Dahomey, attempted to navigate this brutal new reality, they too became reliant on slaving for their survival, their own development distorted by the insatiable demand from the West. Simultaneously, a more subtle economic assault was underway. As European industry began to stir, its manufactured goods, particularly textiles, were poured into African markets. These cheaper, mass-produced items overwhelmed local craft production, leading not to progress but to a technological regression. The hum of the weaver's loom grew faint, the blacksmith's forge cooled. This trade did not lead to modernization. It fostered a deliberate dependence, paving the way for what was to come. Europe's own industrial growth, accelerating at a blinding pace, created an insatiable need for raw materials and captive markets. The stage was set for the age of imperialism, a project driven by capitalist interests and cloaked in the false narrative of a civilizing mission. Despite the resilience and vitality shown by African states like the Oyo Kingdom, they were quickly undermined and consumed by this relentless European expansion. With the continent carved up and claimed, the colonial period began, marking the formal installation of a system designed for a single purpose: the expatriation of African surplus for the benefit of European capitalist development. Colonialism was not a project of uplift, it was an engine of extraction, and its primary fuel was African labor. A working class was forged, but it was kept small, unstable, and impoverished. Wages were set at levels so low they barely sustained life, forcing workers in mines and on plantations to also grow their own food simply to survive. This systemic exploitation was justified by an entrenched institutional racism that deemed the African worker inherently less valuable than their European counterpart. The disparities, they were staggering. A coal miner in Nigeria earned a pittance compared to miners in Scotland or Germany, despite performing the exact same back-breaking labor. And when workers attempted to organize for better conditions, to form unions to challenge this gross inequality, the colonial powers moved swiftly and brutally to suppress them, ensuring the machinery of exploitation continued uninterrupted. The vast majority of Africans were not wage laborers, but independent peasants, yet they too were ensnared in this web of extraction. They were exploited by a hierarchy of colonial trading companies and their local intermediaries. These large European firms, like the United Africa Company, held monopolistic power, allowing them to dictate the terms of trade. They paid African farmers depressingly low prices for their cash crops, cocoa, palm oil, cotton, while simultaneously selling them imported European goods at inflated prices. This created a devastating economic squeeze. Trapped in cycles of debt to usurious lenders, many peasants saw their land, their labor, and their hopes consumed by a system designed to ensure they never got ahead. The surplus value of their hard work was siphoned away, not to build local communities, but to enrich distant shareholders in London, Paris, and Portugal. This extraction was facilitated by every facet of the colonial state. The shipping and banking sectors, far from being neutral services, were key instruments of this economic drain. Colonial shipping lines charged exorbitant freight rates, costs that were effectively borne by the African producer, further diminishing their meager profits. The banking system, meanwhile, existed almost exclusively to serve European capitalist interests. Firms like Barclays and Standard Bank financed colonial enterprises. They facilitated the movement of profits back to Europe, and they generated higher returns from their colonial investments than they did back home. They had little to no engagement with the local African economies, offering no capital for indigenous businesses or farms. The colonial administration itself was the chief economic exploiter. It was not a neutral government, it was an active agent of capitalist interests. Through taxation levied on the African population, it funded its own operations, meaning Africans paid for the cost of their own administration and oppression. These governments often imposed forced labor, compelling Africans to build the very infrastructure, the railways and roads that would more efficiently carry the wealth out of their own country. The legal system was constructed to protect European property, legitimizing the extraction and upholding the racial hierarchies that made it all possible. Even technology and military development became tools of this unequal relationship. The demand for African raw materials, rubber, tin, copper, fueled the rapid advancement of European science and industry. This created a widening technological chasm between the colonizer and the colonized. At the same time, African soldiers were conscripted into colonial armies. They were made to serve European interests, to suppress dissent within their own lands, and to fight and die in Europe's wars, from World War I to World War II. The military power of the colonizers grew in part on the strength of the very people they subjugated. The supposed benefits of this era? They are a cruel fiction. The railways, roads, schools, and hospitals that were built primarily served the needs of European settlers and their economic ventures. Social services were minimal and discriminatory. In Nigeria or Kenya, the difference in healthcare available to a European versus an African was a chasm of injustice. Colonialism was, in its very essence, a system for underdeveloping Africa. It dismantled indigenous economies, suppressed technological growth, and installed a global division of labor that enriched the colonizing powers at the direct expense of the colonized. The legacy of this period is not in the scattered infrastructure left behind, but in the deep structural inequalities that continue to challenge the continent to this day.